Good afternoon. How are you? Well, Thomas Jefferson says it's 57 degrees, and that seems about right. And the humidity is 57 degrees, and the wind is at 4 miles an hour, and you can feel it so slightly. And if you look up at the sky, it's gray in every direction. So it's, I guess it's good walking weather, and it's going to get cooler and wetter. And wetter's not bad because we've had a drought. The topics on the Hill and in the nation that interest me are a different perspective than what I see in the normal news. Normal news sort of accentuates the negative. I had an assistant for years, and I would say when we got into these crises, so we must accentuate the positive and decentuate the negative and watch out for Mr. In Between. And she would always tell me that I had the song wrong. I said, yeah, but the sense was okay. And so I get the feeling that these shows want to tell us how miserable we are. And I've had this attitude in my life about trying to find the positive aspect and running toward that little bit of light, if that's the case, or the kind of favorable location. Because let's face it, there's a lot of there's a lot of pain and joy in any life, and one could spend one's life always upset and depressed, and that just doesn't work. And when Holly and I were fighting with her lung transplant, the doctors kept talking about keeping a positive attitude, and the value of that is that our machine, this walking mass of humanity, that thinking meat that we are, does operate on our attitude as well. So, for example, if you break an arm, your attitude isn't going to bring it back. But if you have an attitude about the recovery, it seems to make a difference. And I don't think it's just an illusion. I think it's real. But that's me. Try it out if you want. So in this category, attitude's bad in publications. And, Morning Joe should take a powder, in my opinion, because you can't be a journalist and then suck up to Trump the way he did, particularly after you pretended to be a friend and nixed the hell out of Biden publicly. A friend, what does a friend do? A friend comes to me, we sit in a room or we take a walk and says, you really shouldn't be doing this. You should do something else. The friend does not then go on national TV and tell the world that I told him that he should do this. That's not what a friend does. And you presume to yourself a prerogative of directing and controlling somebody else's life. And there's a narrow channel where you can do that with someone you know publicly, I think. But, every case is its own. So we have people out there talking about the sky is falling. And there's no question, if we do nothing, the sky will fall in on us. And we have to look for the paths to success, however narrow they get, however dim the light may be. And so, to choose an obvious example, the Gates thing is unfolding in a way that shows that Trump has no idea what he's doing. That is to say, he's unconcerned with the consequences of what he does. And so he waves his public wand and says, Gates should be the head of the Justice Department, proving in one fell swoop there's nothing serious about this administration except to take down the government and to be some kind of potentate, the American potentate. But he chose a bad character to do this with, because now we find out that he was with a woman who was 17. Underage is a big deal. People like myself who do criminal defense work see how brutally these cases are considered in the court system, because that's crossing the line. And so Gates apparently crossed the line in drug-filled rooms supplied by the alleged victim. And this stuff is coming out in leaks. And when I say leaks, the Hill doesn't keep a secret, it's bound to come out. You just have to be a little patient, and now it has. And the funny thing is that tomorrow, Wednesday, the Committee on Ethics on the House side that was investigating Gates is going to have a meeting, I guess, to decide whether or not to override Johnson. But, you know, in a few days, it won't matter what the speaker has to say. It'll all be out there. And it's already coming out. And you have Gates at a party in which they have alcohol, they have coke, they have ecstasy, they have pot, all the kinds of things that a law enforcement guy probably shouldn't be seen doing. You know, you could probably pick out those things that he could do. But sleeping with an underage woman is not among them. And so there are witnesses out there. Now, the bad thing, and I've said this, is that the sex, drugs, and rock and roll part of this is what gets the headlines. But the real story, the one that matters to a government, which is not as much fun as the kind of bread and games aspect of covering this as if it's a criminal who wasn't prosecuted by the Department of Justice, who should have been, if half of this stuff is true, is going to take over the Department of Justice having not a clue how to do the job. And so there'll be more on the sex and crime side, and it'll be interesting to see, and this is kind of like how we test the temperature of how, well, evil Trump is, but how weak the senators are. And what I'm talking about is, are they going to say, look, we're going to advise you about this nominee. We probably suggest you withdraw this nominee. And we're going to ask the tough questions. And it's highly unlikely he'll be approved. That would be a test that the system is working, you know. Put in the plug of justice and see if it lights up. So now there are other aspects of this that don't happen all the time. But I assume McCarthy would shed no tears if Gates were to be thoroughly humiliated and crushed to the ground and not go to become AG. And that's kind of a happy thought, don't you think? There's a way to find happiness in the middle of the, Sturm und Drang of our modern events. No question about that. So the second thing that interests me, and should interest all of us, because mass deportation evokes images we've seen of black and white films in Germany. People loaded into trucks and buses, some naked, abuse, sticks hitting people, this kind of thing. And so the questions that I raised the other day about the legality of it are, I think, arguments that we will hear if this goes forward in the way that Trump has described what it's going to be going forward, namely a mass deportation, up and out, getting rid of all of them. And so the ACLU, and I am a card-carrying member of the ACLU. From time to time I disagree with them, but I'm mostly there. And in this case, what they're seeking is the how. The how are you going to execute this mass deportation? How is that going to happen? How are you going to conduct it? How is it going to be accelerated? Who is going to be involved in it? Now, there has to be, at this time, there has to be a plan or plans, and so it's being requested under the FOIA Act, Freedom of Information Act. And I think that what we are looking at is an organization that had its eye on the ball 9 months ago. They've been asking these questions. They were asking them when Trump was a candidate, and now they're asking it when he is imminently going to raise his hand and lie on a Bible about how he's going to preserve and protect our union and our nation and our government, all of which would be a big, amazing surprise to any of us. So this is an example of where we stand. See, I want you to see some people actually run this road too. So this is an example of the kind of analysis that allows us to find that glimpse of light and to go for it and to push and to fight for our government, even though we have a disjointed, maladjusted, evil occupant in the West Wing. Now, in foreign policy, we got to ask questions about, well, some only want to ask, can something be done? I think we need, in this perilous time, the question to be asked about what may be done, what is permissible. And I'm thinking of international law, and I'm thinking we have to be more complicated than saying, we'll get the bastards, because that's not a foreign policy guaranteed to have a diplomatic conclusion, or to have respect for us as a nation, or to protect us from the argument, well, they're doing it and you're doing it, so who's right? And so what we're talking about in the case of Ukraine is American missiles going inside the borders of Russia. That's a different kind of war, and that's a different step. And what Ukraine may be doing is one thing, but when we're doing it, it's quite another. It is an act of war, and sooner or later, people will be saying it and trying to dodge it in some way or other. But what Ukraine may do, we may not do. And there's a price to pay if this goes south. Now, another thing is we support Netanyahu, and now there's a report out that he proudly announces that when they fired on Iran, they struck part of the nuclear program that Iran has. I don't know if it's true, but it's a statement that is going to energize and encourage more warlike behavior and put us a further distance from any settlement in the region. And for those who say, oh yeah, to the war, to the end, it's not your children, not your people sitting there on the ground who are dying because of this nonsense. And I say it's nonsense in this sense. It was, it's nonsense when acts of war become the conduct of the war. And that's the problem with what's happening in the Middle East. And then, of course, in Ukraine, we have Putin trying to resurrect the Soviet Empire by invading Ukraine. And surprise, surprise, it didn't work out in 2 days. And we came loping to the help of Ukraine, and now we're taking steps that are at the very least controversial. So that's what I got to say today from the Cathedral of Trees. And with any luck, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye.